my esteemed colleague, I just have to say, she is such a great and strong leader. She is really the backbone of this coalition. She and our good friend Abu Topin started the DEI coalition. And along with having a job that is 24 hours, 7 days a week, she also manages us and carries us through this work. So presenting to you, Jill Harvey from the town of Arlington.
Thanks, Emily. Good morning, everyone. Super excited to be hosting this launch. And we were aiming low. We were like, we hope 35 people show up, but we're over 100. So this is amazing. But I just want to, again, thank everyone for taking the time this morning to join us. And let me see, are we gonna put the slides up so folks can follow along? Awesome, thanks. All right, so we are just going to go through our agenda today, today's program, what that's going to look like. Emily, want to hit the next slide? Great, thanks. So this program is being brought to you by the Mass DEI Coalition and MAPC. So we are going to start with some introductions, review some touchstones that we have, and I'll speak to the Mass DEI Coalition, what it is, how it came to be, what we've learned over the past year, and then we'll also have some time for me to share my experiences in my DEI role, but also hear from a few of our other coalition members to speak to their experiences as well. After that, we'll also hear from a municipal leader who really prioritized this DEI work within his town, and then we're just going to have space for kind of a discussion with us. And in that time, folks can put their questions or comments they have in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to most of them, hopefully, but I have a feeling it'll probably be a lot of them, but we'll work our way through them. And then we'll also hear from another partner, and then we'll close it out with some resources and some next steps that we want to be able to share with you all as we all embark on this DEI journey together. So introductions, firstly, I'm Jill. Emily shared that with you. So I'm the DEI director for the town of Arlington. And I would love to have everyone, if you're able to, we've got, like I said, a lot of folks on this call this morning, but if you want to introduce yourselves in the chat, just share your name, your organization, your town or city, maybe your title. And then I do have a question that I wanted to pose to folks. What brings you to this conversation today? And why are you joining us? And what's maybe sparked your interest in the topic of DEI? So while you think about that question, I'm going to work through the touchstones that we have. So the DEI Coalition meets twice a month. And when we do so, we always start with our touchstones. And so these will guide us through today's conversation. They guide us through the meetings that we have monthly. And working through those, we have be present, presume welcome, and extend welcome, listen deeply, believe that it's possible to emerge refreshed, surprised, and less burdened. There's no fixing, no saving, no advising, and no setting each other straight. Always by invitation, speak for yourself and speak your truth in ways that respect others' truths. Suspend judgment, listen to the silence, maintain confidentiality, expect and accept a lack of closure. When things get difficult, turn to wonder. And so our group agreements is that we always refer to these touchstones when it's needed, and that this is a space that we feel we can be open and honest and have real, raw discussion. So with that, we're gonna go on to learn about how we got here. So DEI roles are not a newly invented career in the last year. They've actually been around for a really long time, specifically in higher education, in the private sector, but most recently, we've been seeing them pop up in towns and cities, and this isn't by accident. The happenings of the last few years has really sparked this reactionary response by municipalities to hire someone to maybe come in and fix their issues. But as we know, that doesn't really work. So the pandemic, March 2020, um, really highlighted a lot of the racial disparities that we have in this country. It's something that we know has been an issue for centuries, but with the pandemic, there definitely was this increase in awareness and visually being able to see what was happening. In addition to that, we also saw a rise in hate incidents and discrimination against Asians and Asian Americans. And so that was something that was very much in our faces. We call it the racial awakening. I call it the racial reawakening because it's happened more than once in this country. But by May 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, the timing was, I'm going to say, impeccable, because with COVID in the setting that we were already in, everyone really had no choice but to sit with what was happening. And what happened to George Floyd is not a first. It's something, again, that's been happening for centuries. And folks didn't have a choice but to pay attention. And if you chose not to, or if you chose to still not believe that this is sometimes the lived reality for folks of color, then that's on you. But there was this reawakening of what was going on. And so a lot of the response was, okay, we need to prioritize diversity, inclusion, racial equity. How do we do it? We hire someone. The other two bullet points that kind of got looped into this work were lack of representation in municipal workforce and then growing diversity. All of our demographics are changing. Those two things, again, were not new. They've been there, they just have not been given attention. And so now with this full combination, folks decided, okay, we're going to hire someone to take this on. And that's a big task to just hand over to someone, especially when there's no structures in place to fully support it. So as we kind of got to this place, we're now in 2022, new DEI roles in towns and cities often go by different names: Chief Equity Officer, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director or Coordinator, Chief Diversity Officer, whatever the name is. Everyone's kind of doing this different set of responsibilities that ranges widely across departments, but there isn't a standard for what this role looks like. And so that's kind of how the coalition became to start. So what is the DEI Coalition? In early 2021, I found myself and another DEI director for the city of Beverly, Abu, who is on this call as well. We were discussing setting up a group for folks who had our role. Because I was one of the first folks in the municipality to have it, I found myself talking to individuals again and again and again about how did you get started, just really providing some guidance and figuring out. And even in my role, I'm still figuring it out. So we recognized that there were no standards in place for DEI practices, or at least written down within municipalities specifically. And so many of these roles are also pretty lonely. It's usually often filled by a person of color in usually predominantly white spaces. If you look at the demographics of towns and city workforces, it's predominantly white, even in cities and towns that are very diverse with their population. So an effort to build support and collaborative thinking around DEI work, the Mass DEI Coalition was established in February 2021. That group consists of town and city employees or designees in a DEI role. So if you have that title, DEI Director, Chief Equity Officer, et cetera, that you were brought into this space. The other thing we noticed was that there were a lot of municipalities trying to either set these positions up or doing something in that place. So there might be a DEI board or commission that was getting established, or talks of it getting established, or appoint staff person who was kind of just, an add-on to their job to look into DEI work. So all of those folks are what created the coalition. And like I said, we have monthly meetings. They're used to make connections, share guidance, advice, and discuss challenges. And we are also continuing a community of practice. As local government leaders in DEI, we're trying to create the standards that we're missing and put something in place so that we can help folks who are just entering this work have a good starting platform. MAPC joined the effort early on to support the work of the coalition. So shout out to Emily, the Director of Community Engagement. She played a pivotal role in the coalition's success and will help us continue to move this work forward. So right now you can see this cute little map of Massachusetts. Hey, so right now on the left side is all of the towns and cities across the state that have been involved with the coalition. And that's either someone being put in a role, or a DEI commissioner board is being established or in the works, or folks who reached out and attended some of our meetings because they're looking to get started to do this work and need some guidance in doing it. So you can see that a lot of these positions exist in the greater Boston area. In the water is Nantucket. We know it's a little off, but we got folks out there too. And so we also know that some of the work is disappearing too. So we're trying to build more networks and folks and that support, because if things fail, it doesn't mean just give it up. It means, you know, there are other folks who are doing this work who can help you, and we're here. So a lot of these bodies already exist. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's work together to kind of make something happen across the state. All right, so in the last year and a half, or a little more than a year and a half, as a group, we've definitely been able to highlight some of the challenges in doing this work. There's a huge learning curve in terms of maybe doing DEI work in a different space. Municipal government is a special beast. How it functions is special. Each town and city also has its own unique way of functioning as well. And so you have to take all of that into account. Something that works in Boston might not work in Arlington because of our government structure. So while we can share practices, you also still have to take the time to really tailor it to your own community. Another thing is with these DEI roles, like I said, as they're very reactionary, there's a lot of expectations at once that are very much unrealistic for anyone to meet, especially one person, not a whole department. You also have a mix of expectations from community members and employees, and that's really difficult to navigate because you're kind of put in a situation where you have a job description, but everything you're doing outside of that description adds on to all of the different sets of expectations that it's just not realistic, and so folks need to accept that. This job is also really emotionally demanding and draining. Like I said, many of the folks who sit in these roles are typically people of color, and to be situated in a space that's predominantly white, you're also doing the work, but the work is also personal. And so there's a high burnout rate. You see folks lasting in these roles maybe a year, year and a half, sometimes a lot less. I think we've seen in the last few months, folks make it to maybe 3 months, 3 to 6 months. So wellness and self-care are really vital. And I don't mean just taking a bath or like having your wine, but doing the real work to really sit with yourself and know that you have support to be able to work through some of the difficult challenges that folks in these roles are experiencing. You know, when something happens that's on the news, you still have to show up to your job, even though personally it's impacting you a certain way. You still have your responsibilities, but knowing that you have that support from your colleagues is vital. And some folks don't have that support. And so that's a big challenge, is understanding, you know, you can't just hire someone without putting the right resources and support in place. And then On the flip side, there's lots of other great work happening. So in addition to challenges, we've also noticed some things that are going to help folks who are either creating a DEI role or have one, how to improve it. So some of the best practices that we've noted as a group is that DEI positions need to be at the top leadership level and not just in title, but in practice. They need to be a part of decision making, they need to be listened to, and they need to be backed up by leadership as well. Again, a lot of these roles are singular. Typically, they're expected to do internal and external facing work. So working with employees, but then also working with the community. That's a lot for one person. So there does need to be some type of additional support, whether it's additional staff, folks who can assist with maybe administrative duties, or if there are other boards or commissions that can also support the work as well. That would be vital. There needs to be a financial investment. Budget, budget, budget. We always hear, budget's tight, we don't have the money. If you're hiring someone, you need to provide them with the resources that they're going to need to do their job and do it well. Another common practice is that we've noticed is starting with an equity assessment or community equity audit. One of my favorite phrases that I say all the time is, we don't know what we don't know. And like I said, every community is different. So you cannot just apply a cookie cutter solution to doing equity work. You need to be able to look at your community, look at your workforce, and do a full equity assessment to really figure out what it is in your community that is causing barriers to access, or if it's the workplace culture. But that needs to happen on that individual municipal level. There seems to be also different trends we notice. Some folks start with a task force, then that moves to a committee, then that means hiring one person and then hiring, staffing a department. That was kind of the track, I think, somewhat for me, but there's been different places are doing different things. Some are jumping to some of these different steps. And so again, by looking at your own community, maybe if you're starting with this equity audit, you can see what of those steps is going to make sense for you. Having a small group of folks who are dedicated to the work is really helpful to be able to look at what your future is for your municipality. And then lastly, schools and municipalities need their own DEI roles. I'm lucky enough to have that in Arlington, but having someone who's in a DEI role for a town or city doing both, staff and community work, and then expecting them to also be involved in schools is just very unrealistic. The way schools function and the way towns and cities function is very different. There's typically a school committee or a city council or select board, etc. And the practices, just the functioning in general, can be very different. I think there should be alignment between the two, but it cannot be one person being the liaison to both schools and municipalities. So those are some of the lessons learned. And so why we're having this whole launch. So in realizing that a lot of the DEI work happening in different towns and cities was not uniform, or following guidelines, like we said, the coalition thought it would make sense to put our expertise to work and create a guide for municipalities. So if you haven't already, definitely check it out. It's a wonderful tool, but the guide really highlights the importance of leadership playing a key role in uplifting equity as a priority for municipalities and fully supporting the work as well. And I do want to I think it's essential to recognize the individuals who committed to building this guide. I think many, if not all, are on this call today. And I know that each of them is humble and wouldn't want to take credit for their work on this, but I do want to just give shout outs to Dr. Renita Barros, Martha Dupfield, Tina Los, Dr. Kamal McCarthy, Joan Courtney Murray, John Chivley, and Emily Torres-Callahan and myself for really dedicating the time to put this guide together. Like most things, it takes intentionality when we want something. And in the fall of 2021, this small group formed to really focus on putting this guide together on top of our regular jobs. So not only doing our day-to-day jobs, being full functioning members of the coalition, but then also bi-weekly meeting to start to craft this. And it was really an amazing experience to see the final product. In doing all of this, we weren't really thinking about ourselves, but more about the practitioners who were coming after us. And it's been great because I know with the guide being finished this spring, folks who have just recently taken on these roles have been just beyond appreciative that they have this resource available because it's tailored to DEI work in municipalities. A lot of the research you might find, different resources, are not really tailored to the work that we are doing. So I just want to shout out everyone. All right, and then, so what's in the guide? Hopefully everyone has seen it. If you haven't, it's filled with lots of juicy stuff. So there's really, we start by defining what diversity, equity, and inclusion are. And with that, noting that DEI has different meanings, but you need to decide with your community what your shared definition is. The guide also works through how to get started if it's your first attempt at even like, you don't know where to get started. How to share the work, you know, the graph on the side, right here on this slide, shows how DEI work needs to be supported, but also how it can be shared. Because even though you're hiring maybe one person, it's not one person's job to do equity work. It needs to start to be baked into every department and everybody's job description and role. And so this flowchart helps to show where all of the different departments in a municipality can uplift this work. There's also, the guide also walks through how to establish a role or a department, what are the best practices there, how to establish a volunteer group as well, and then what it looks like to evaluate this work within a municipality. Because it is new to this sphere, you know, metrics and how to evaluate are vital because you need to also showcase that it is needed and it's essential for growth of the town or city. There's also a really great section on that wellness and that self-care component that we've talked about. And then at the end, there's lots of different resources, templates, example job descriptions, and different tools that will probably just be helpful along the way if you're just starting this journey, or if you need a refresher. Yesterday, I was actually looking through the guide and I was like, I forgot about this. This is great. I need to revisit this for myself. All right, so that's me. And I just want to share a little bit about my experience before handing it over to our next coalition member. So unlike many of the roles and folks that we'll hear from, I was not hired in 2020. I started right at the end of 2019, and before I was hired as a DEI coordinator. Before my role was created, there was support and intentionality from the town of Arlington before just putting me into this role. There were a number of commissions established. So our Human Rights Commission, our Disability Commission, the LGBTQIA+ Rainbow Commission were all in existence. My role was to come in to help oversee that work and help lead the town in their racial equity work. But with that, I wasn't the starter. The town had already joined GARE, the Government Alliance for Race and Equity, before I started. They already had plans to do racial equity training with the National League of Cities. And so I was stepping into a municipality that was already getting this work started and recognized that they needed additional support. I wasn't coming in to fix. The town and leadership also adopted the following statement: Arlington values equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're committed to building a community where everyone is heard, respected, and protected. And with that, my role, I think, sits perfectly with it. I came in, understood the assignment, and working with leadership who has stuck to that statement, I've been able to grow, develop a division, hire staff, have a budget, and it's really a great example of how this work in this DEI role should be. And I'm just really grateful that Arlington was able to provide that support and be, I'd say, a good example for other municipalities. And so my experience is a little bit different because I wasn't coming in to a reactionary, we'll call it a bad time. 2020 was not the best, but I'm grateful that I've been able to connect with folks who did get thrown into that mix. So I'm next going to pass it to Albert Pless, the town of Andover DEI director who recently started.
Thanks, Jill. It's kind of great to follow Jill. I had the pleasure of working with Jill in a different capacity when I was in Cambridge at the health department, and I kind of watched her work in Arlington, which is the neighbor of Cambridge, and watching her do a DEI work. In fact, I was really drawn to that work, actually watching Jill do her work and really kind of thinking proactively about diversity and inclusion. So it's really just good to see her. So it's good to follow Jill. Tough act to follow. But again, I think it's great to follow her, and she's very humble in her work, not taking credit for a lot, but she should more. So again, Albert Pless, I'm Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the town of Andover. Been here in town for 10 months. 10 months would be in October. Before I get started, I just want to really I think our town manager, Andrew Fang, is on our call today. I want to thank him for his leadership in this space. We're going to talk often today, and we talk often in our calls about the importance of leadership in this space. And so really want to just call him out for that. And also Jimmy Lambert, who also is supporting in our work and that big internal champion for us. You know, my position, as Jill mentioned, is an inward and outward facing position. So again, just really thinking about how that work can be best supported on the kind of town side, staff side, around looking at policies and systems, but also really helping building capacity and resilience within our community as well. In my opinion, again, I think Jill also was set up well. I think Andover was set up well for its DEI director. Diversity audit was already done in 2020 prior to me coming on. Really engaging community, really getting that community voice to make sure they set up a strategic plan that really gave a framework for this work. So again, set me up well. We know the work is all about sustaining that. So I think that's where the challenge and opportunities are, you know, for this position. So I'm just going to speak briefly a little bit to, you know, those on the call that may be either thinking about onboarding their directors or just really how to continue kind of recruitment or just that whole space. So this is kind of for the HR folks or just those small kind of working groups and task forces that are really kind of thinking again about getting this on board. So again, I came from public health. I worked in public health for 20 years. And I would just call off that sector as a potential sector around thinking through, because of a lot of the work that we do in public health and did in public health is thinking upstream about root causes. And I think that that's an incredible asset to this work in DEI, because again, a lot of what we should be doing, in my opinion, is thinking about where this is coming from and how can we think about prevention around that. You know, I think we're still going to have to kind of, again, go downstream and think about, you know, kind of pulling things out of the water. But I think we have an opportunity to think about upstream. So I think public health for me, was a great launching pad to come into this work, really thinking about, how can we address some of those root causes, and also the framework of public health for me, again, social terms of health, really kind of forced me in thinking about how we can address barriers to helping marginalized and underrepresented communities really get the access that they need, and also thinking about how to work with privileged communities as well, and really making sure they recognize their privilege and how to be an asset and work side by side with others who may not have that same privilege and access. So really great sector, great launching pad for me to really come into this space. And I would encourage again, HR directors, those who are thinking about building this work in, considering not just public health, again, I'm calling it out because I worked in that sector, but really thinking about other spaces that you can really begin to think about recruiting your DEI directors. Again, this is a growing field, and there's a lot of training, a lot of best practices out there. A lot of people are really in this space. So you can find some people that have been doing DEI work for a long period of time, but I think really thinking through particular sectors and even the educational sector as well, thinking through where there might be individuals that are really thinking and having those kind of skills. I think in thinking about what you're looking for, I think at the core of this, and we talk about this often on our calls, is really this passion that we all have for this work. So, having that, looking for an individual that shows that passion, and that could be either in some of the external work that they're doing outside their work, but really kind of getting a sense of that passion for change, for equity, for social justice. And again, that can come in different forms, right? People are doing many different things in this space that can demonstrate that they have a passion for social justice and equity, and they might be doing that in a particular job. So really kind of stretching and thinking about that, from a different lens. Also people who have worked with and for and side by side with marginalized communities. That's another space, another sector of individuals that you can begin to kind of look at and begin to, again, consider for your positions of DEI. Those who also have worked in privileged communities, as well, understand again what it means to have privilege and how you kind of leverage that privilege and make sure that other communities have their voice and uplifting those voices. Those who worked in local government. What we talked about, we were laughing about this on a call the other day or the evening, is that the fact that, a lot of us, didn't work in local government, and really thinking about how to understand how local government works and how the systems work in local government, understanding that, it's a slow process, and really understanding how do you get things done in a process like that. So again, just understanding people may have that experience in working in local government, because what I want to stress a little bit today in this piece is that some of the things in DEI you can teach. You can teach a lot of the things that, so you can have someone working in local government or other sectors, and they have really good at that. And, potentially they may not have a whole lot of the DEI resume. So it's fine thinking about those individuals as you're going about recruiting and bringing folks on. A couple other things really thinking about diversity as well. I think oftentimes, and Joe called it out, when towns or just organizations are bringing on the DEI directors, oftentimes they lean towards people of color. And I think that's fine, right? I think we see a lot of disparities there. We see a lot of inequities there. I think a lot is there. And again, these positions, a lot of them were created post George Floyd. So I think a lot of people are looking at Black communities and saying we need to hire a person of color in that role. But I would challenge you to think about diversity in Broadway. You're thinking about a lot of aspects of diversity, gender diversity, just culture, age, and just think about really how do you have someone come in that can celebrate diversity and really bring that lens around looking at diversity with a broad lens, not just a person of color. In some ways, that does feel a little reactive and feels a little short term. So really thinking about the right person for your positions. And I would lean a lot more towards broad diversity, but also skills. It takes a lot to navigate these systems, as you referenced earlier, really to navigate them and being able to get things done. And that takes skills. You don't want to just have a particular face of your organization and that just be it. Because again, that's short-term thinking. We want to make sure you're leaning on people who have the skills, expertise to move these things along. The last couple of things are really thinking about, how do you set someone up for success, and that individual and the community? Because this is why you have to know your community needs. Community needs assessments are great, equity audits are great, but really continue to talk to your community, learn what they feel like is going to work for them to do this long term. Because you don't want to make sure that you are not bringing someone in that, again, is reactionary, and it's not what's going to help move your community towards being a more diverse and more community-centered on equity, and a community that really think that values inclusion, and that inclusion piece I think is key, because it's about everyone in your community. It's about everybody in your town, everyone in your organization. It's not just the people of color. It's not just the women. It's not just the men. It's really thinking broadly about everyone in your community and organization, and how to center equity and inclusion in on those spaces. So again, I encourage, your organizations, and as you're thinking about this work, to really begin to really challenge yourself. And again, some of the things that may, again, be short-term thinking, but really thinking and beginning to really to stretch this thinking around, we want to sustain this work. Essentially we want to put our DEI directors out of work, right? And so I'm saying that, I don't know if I have a job, but really thinking about putting us out of work, because that's really about making sure that we are thinking upstream and thinking about people that can help us think upstream about changing the culture of our organizations as well as our towns. So again, that's my piece. And again, I'm glad that everyone's on this call today. I'm excited about being a part of the launch. I'm just going to pass it on to my colleague, Christina, who's the DEI director in Lynn.
Thank you, Albert. So many gems right there. I hope people are listening. So thank you so much, Albert. As Albert said, my name is Faustina Cuevas. I use she, ella pronouns, and I am the City of Lynn's DEI officer. I came on board back in June 2021. So I've been in my role for a little over a year. And I am from Lynn. I am a proud Lynner. So this was like a homecoming for me. And it was really exciting to be able to tap into skills that I already had, because I've been doing DEI work in higher education for about 10 years. So it was sort of like a homecoming, and being able to do this work in my community really means the world to me. It was definitely not easy getting here. This position was advocated by the community after the murder of George Floyd. They really pushed for this role to come to be. It didn't come to be immediately. City council, they had a lot of questions. It was very challenging to pass the position, but eventually, once it passed through city council, I was able to apply, and here I am. But definitely hasn't, like Jill said, it was, some municipalities were already thinking about this before sort of this quote unquote racial awakening. And some folks sort of came, these roles came to be after the fact. So I think there's like a difference too in how you approach the work when it comes out of an incident or a situation. It makes it a little bit more challenging to do the work, because some people are not necessarily ready to dive into the work. Luckily for me, and our director of personnel is here today, Drew Russo. So I'm really thankful for him. I'm actually going to have him speak in a moment. So Drew, prepare yourself. But I think it was really important that Drew, he was already thinking about this. So fall 2020, he launched a series of DEI trainings for department heads. So this was prior to this role coming to be. He was already preparing sort of the workforce to think about DEI, and he hired me actually as a private consultant to do that work. And so for me, it was telling that this community was starting to think about this, and we're starting to educate people on this, and then the role came. So it wasn't necessarily a shock to our city workforce when this position came to be, but there was a lot of work that still needed to be done to get people on board. So I want to talk a little bit, if we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about our wins in Lynn. So Lynn, the city of opportunities, and we've been really lucky. I have worked now under two mayors, Mayor Tom McGee and now Mayor Jared Nicholson, and I've been really lucky that they've been very supportive of this work. They've been champions of this work, and they have really been willing to think about this, to sit down with me, to talk through things, to support it, to put money towards things, right? I know somebody asked like a budget question in the chat. So it's really important that municipal leaders are buying into this work to avoid a lot of the things what my colleagues have already said, right? Avoid burnout, avoid people feeling isolated, like they're in an island on their own. These things are really important. So I want to talk briefly about some of the things that we've been able to really achieve here in Lynn. And I do want our HR personnel director. You know, everybody calls it something different, personnel HR. But I do want Drew to jump in once I'm done with this, because he's played a pivotal role in partnering with me to see some of these projects through, and has been a huge support system and mentor, especially again, thinking about us that do not come from a government background. How do we navigate the politics, the culture that's been around long before many of us, right? So I also think it's really important to think about that when you are onboarding staff who do not come from a background in government and municipal work. It's a different world, y'all. So it's really important that they feel supported, that they feel like they have a sounding board. So we've been able to do DEI trainings. These are mandatory trainings, again, that has to come from your leader, right? Our mayor sent out an email and said, everyone needs to do this, right? Everyone needs to participate in this. We started with department heads, then we moved to supervisors and managers, and then we did frontline staff. It was very important to break those groups up so that people can have the ability to speak honestly, to be vulnerable, to have space to vent and tell their stories without, you know, these power dynamics being present in the room. And I'm happy to talk to anyone that has questions about how we were able to do that. I've also offered myself to do DEI trainings for community organizations serving vulnerable populations specifically. Capacity is a concern, y'all. So I think I've tried to minimize that to organizations who are already working with vulnerable communities and want to learn more about how does bias show up when I am doing an intake process? How am I thinking about certain things when I'm hosting an event? How am I thinking about language access when I'm hosting an event? So I'm willing to come and work with organizations on a very short period to help them get over that hump. I saw something about employee resource groups. We launched employee resource group again with the support of Drew and in our personnel department. We were able to launch employee resource groups last year. So we've been doing them for a year now. These are identity-based and interest-based. So we have one for staff of color, one for multilingual staff, which we actually ended up combining. Working women, working moms. We had one on digital connection in the age of technology, right? Learning how to navigate technology in the times of the pandemic. A lot of us sort of were like, how do you do all this? And this year, we're going to have a conversational Spanish employee resource group. And these are all led by volunteer and city staff who want to lead these conversations. So it's really exciting to have these groups. A lot of amazing ideas have been born out of these groups. We've been able to look at different policies, establish new processes because of the ideas that are being born in these groups is really amazing. And these groups are open to all city staff, regardless of identity. The important part is that we're centering the voices of the group, right? So our staff of color group, anyone can come, but know that we're going to be centering the voices of our staff of color, right? So we have had progress on our unarmed crisis response team. We hired a set of consultants. We're going through that right now. MAPC is one of our consultants, Health Resources and Actions, and Collins Center from UMass Boston. We're working on trying to think of alternatives to policing in our community, which is a challenge in its own. Happy to talk a little bit more about that offline, but we're trying to make that, make some progress here. The Real Team implementation, so Racial Equity Advisory Leadership Team, we just launched that. That team will be reporting to the mayor, and that was really born out of the REMAP process, which is the Racial Equity Municipal Action Plan process that Lynn has also chosen to participate in. Highly recommend municipalities to join REMAP if this is an active thing you are thinking about. We launched this past spring a free Spanish conversational course in partnership with North Shore Community College. So we have 12 city staff that graduated from this 15-week course. It was free to them. Again, Drew found the money in his budget to pay for this. And it was amazing because the majority language in Lynn is Spanish. So a lot of our city workforce want to learn, how do I speak a little bit of Spanish to be able to tell somebody if I see them in the hallway and they're lost, be able to tell them, hey, el cuarto que buscas es 206, right? Like, how do I just guide people instead of being like, I don't know, I can't communicate with you, good luck, right? We're trying to make an investment in who's coming into our building and make them feel like they're welcome, like they belong here. And having these courses available to staff signals not only to the community, but to the staff, we're willing to make an investment for you to educate yourself and create a space to take the course. I also host staff of color lunches monthly. So we go off site as a staff of color group and just vent, laugh, Sometimes we cry, right? It really is a safe space for staff of color to, have a lunch hour. We're offsite for us to like talk through things, and have a space where it's safe and that we can have shared community. And that staff of color lunch is only open to staff of color. So I just want to say that because, I think there's sometimes questions, can I go? Nope, that's what the employee resource groups are for. The staff of color lunch is for a safe space for those who identify as such. We've been able to talk about creating an onboarding buddy system that was born out of the employee resource groups. Again, we do not have sort of structures in place to help support new staff, but especially those who have never worked in municipal government. So Drew and I are going to launch an onboarding buddy system where you're going to get assigned a buddy when you enter City Hall outside of your department, someone that you can go to, someone that can be your point person outside of your department, your supervisor, just someone else in the building. And we are going to be intentional about who those people are, right? And that's really important to think about. Interpreter services. So for those of you that didn't know, 24.3% of Massachusetts residents are non-English speakers. This is actually higher than the national average, which is 21.9%. That is very telling about what is our investment to language access looking like, right? So last year under Mayor McGee, he gave me the freedom to think about what interpreter services looks like. And we were able to invest $800,000 for language access support using ARPA funds. So we were able to get 4 interpreters now. They're here part-time in the building, 15 hours a week, they rotate. We have Spanish, Haitian Creole, Arabic, and Khmer, which speak to sort of the bigger buckets of folks in our community that need that language access support, especially in the building. We launched multilingual signage. That was part of the image you saw myself and Mayor Nicholson next to the signs. But I also want to shout out Mayor McGee because I started that project under him and he was very supportive. So now all the building, all the signage, all the directories in our building are in Spanish and English, which again is a visible marker to the community that we are making an investment, that we see them, right? The majority ethnic group in Lynn is Latinos. That jump has significantly increased and we just keep seeing that increase. We believe the census is undercutting that Spanish is the majority language in Lynn, right? I think the census is just falling a little short just because we know there's some complexities in our community, especially a lot of our undocumented communities not feeling comfortable filling out the census. So it's an investment, right? And most recently, Mayor Nicholson made an investment on simultaneous interpretation equipment, which is a huge win. So not only now can we have interpreters, but we can be translating in real time. So everyone's receiving the information at the same time, right? So again, you need to have that support. You need to have those structures in place to move some of these things forward. You need to have the right partners. And speaking of partners, I just want our HR director, Drew Russo, to just talk a little bit about our partnership and why you have made that choice to invest in DEI work and really be a thought partner and a leader in this work in our building.
Well, Faustina, thank you for your leadership and for everything that you bring to us. And I think the one thing I want to say to my fellow HR directors that are on the Zoom today is lean into this work, lean into these relationships. The relationship that Faustina and I have built, the professional relationship, is one that guides everything that we do in personnel every day. Faustina and I, we talk literally every single day. We share our joys, we share our struggles, we problem solve together. And I think that we've been able to make great strides. Primarily, and I want to give the credit where the credit is due. Having Faustina as part of our city government is a huge resource for us in truly achieving a culture of belonging. We did 8 workshops this summer, DEI workshops. We worked with almost 200 employees, and Faustina is the leader. I tend to be the sidekick, wing person, whatever. And I tell our staff every time we get together, and Faustina and I have done this together now about 14 times. I have a new learning every single time we have these conversations. I learn from Faustina, I learn from our employees. And I think for those of us that are in human resources, this is an incredibly difficult job, particularly at the municipal level. The city of Lynn is almost 175 years old in terms of our functionality as a municipal government. That's a lot of structure to change. it doesn't happen overnight, but I think we do so by finding partners and leaning into the discomfort that that causes. This is not a comfortable process, particularly, you know, when you're a person, you know, I'm a white male, I have to recognize my privilege all the time. And that means leaning into discomfort. But that process also can generate a lot of joy. And having Faustina Cuevas as our DEI officer, especially as somebody who is not only somebody that is of Lynn, but who had a personal experience of how this city government was not as open, transparent, and inclusive as it should have been, I think has guided all of our work. And so, like, this is very important work for us. It is messy. It is difficult at times. Faustina and I, you know, sometimes have conversations where we probably, you know, we probably, not that we want to sort of like tear each other's hair out, but like we have to work through some of those challenges. But to have a thought partner and a true leader to do that work with you, and that also comes from the top. Mayor Nicholson is such a strong supporter and champion of this work, and we could not do that without him. I think is moving us in the direction to truly build that culture of belonging, not just for the people that work here, but for the people that need to be served here. And so it's great to be able to come in and say a couple of words, because we are just so grateful to have Faustina as part of our team and to really be a partner with us.
Thank you so much, Jim. Do you see why I love him? Do you see? I'm so lucky. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand it out to another amazing municipal leader, Adam Chapdelaine, and his amazing story around how he's been supporting this work when he was when he was in his role as town manager for the town of Arlington. Thank you, Adam.
All right, thank you. There's not much left to say after these great presentations, and I know we're coming up on Q&A, so I will be very brief, but I'm really happy to be here today. I'm really glad to see Jill after the work that we did together with the team over the past couple of years, and frankly, really proud of Jill for all the work she's done to get to this point, especially with this DEI guide. Quickly, I was the former town manager in Arlington. I was in that role for about a decade. I left this past June, and I now just started a role working as the deputy director of the Boston Green Ribbon Commission, which works on climate change, but has a very strong focus on climate justice. So this work is still very close to what I do on a daily basis. And I think I just want to say a few things, and almost all of this will be underscoring what has already been shared today. And I want to start by saying, it became apparent to me, and I think others in Arlington, going back a number of years, probably back into 2018, stemming from some training we received from the National League of Cities at a national conference, that even though the greater Boston region is very segregated, and we all know the reasons for that, the historic reasons for that, that doesn't mean that every single community, all 351, frankly, in the whole state, aren't diverse. Right. And just because it isn't making up a huge part of your community doesn't mean that you don't have people in your community that are of varied races, varied abilities or disabilities, coming from the LGBTQIA community. We all live, work in, and serve diverse communities. And making sure that your institution, your organization is equipped to understand that diversity and then to provide service to those diverse populations really is mission critical. Because if you're not serving everybody in your community equally and equitably, then really you're not doing your job as a local government. And I think that was the starting point for beginning to look at DEI work in Arlington. Moving from there, as Jill mentioned, back in 2019, we put together the funding for the position, put together training with the National League of Cities for staff. Jill, I can't believe everyone has been there for 3 years. You're like the longest serving in the role across the state. And then we all went through those same challenges that have been talked about over the past couple of years, mostly immediately following the murder of George Floyd. And I think Drew just touched on this. Some of the challenges as an appointed municipal official or leader is you really do need to find a way both internally and externally, to confront some very harsh realities. Many of the realities that you have to address are 175 or 200 years baked in, as Faustina just mentioned. And many of the realities aren't things that a lot of us ever learn, but they are real. Just because they weren't in the history books that we had in high school doesn't mean they're not realities, and it doesn't mean they're not things that need to be addressed. So confronting those realities yourself as an individual, and then working with others in your organization to confront those realities can be very, very challenging. It can be very emotional, it can be very personal, and you have to work through those tough issues to try to advance and change your organization to adapt to the reality of the 21st century, while acknowledging the history of the past 200 years of this country. I think Jill touched on this. Another challenge is you do have to figure out that balance of internal versus external work, right? Our missions as a local government is to serve the public, but we're an organization. Depending on the size of your community, you have 100, 200, 300 employees. You're an organization, you're an employer, and you have to figure out the right way to build, maintain, and foster employee culture around inclusivity. And hiring one person into your organization, as has been touched upon, to do all that work, both externally and internally, I mean, it's obviously impossible. So figuring out the right way to either build staff or assign staff that are existing to share in that load is an important part of this work and a challenge of this work. Working to build and then expand organizational buy-in is really hard. There are, I would imagine this is the case in every organization. There are some people, they are ready to go and they are excited that as a municipal government, you want to roll up your sleeves and do DEI work. And they're the first to volunteer, the first to show up to the training, and the first to help. And then there's a lot of people who are, they haven't paid a lot of attention to it. They're willing to learn, but it's new to them. And then there's some people that aren't going to take this medicine very easily, and they need to be continually worked with and brought along. And it is possible. It's hard work, but it is possible. And another challenge that maybe is an obvious one is, as a municipal leader, your time is very constrained, right? You have 100, 1,000 challenges, emails coming in from all different directions. But in the face of those time constraints, you still have to find a way to prioritize this work if you want it to be effective in your organization and in the community at large. So moving beyond that, and I'll try to wrap up here, I would just push any organization or municipal leader that's listening in today, if you haven't been able yet to make an investment in a DEI officer, I would strongly urge you to consider doing it. I think it is all the hard work that you've heard about today, but it will pay dividends for your organization and for your community if you are able to make that investment. And as a leader, I would say, if you really want this to be successful, you have to find a way to prioritize the work. You have to find a way to keep it front burner for yourself and other people in your organization. And I'll say the way we did that in Arlington is we had a weekly meeting of what we called our core group with myself, Jill, the deputy town manager, the HR director, the police chief, the health and human services director, and other town staff. So we built a team that we all worked together to make sure that we were constantly advancing, discussing, and staying on top of what became a multitude of DEI efforts in the community. So I hope this has been helpful. I'm definitely here to answer any questions that anybody might have. And really congratulations to Jill, to Emily, to the whole team for all their work in putting together this excellent DEI guide. So thank you.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks for your support these last few years. All right, so we are going to jump into some of the questions that have been put in the chat and asked. So I'm going to open up the floor for myself, Albert, Faustina, and Adam to answer some of these. So one of the first ones is, what does a budget for this work look like, and how do consultants fit into that? I'd say, well, if anyone wants to jump in, you can. But I would say you have to know your community and what your budget is that you're going to work with. But Adam, you can probably speak to this better.
Yeah, I would jump in on that and say, yes, certainly every community has different financial ability or financial constraints, but you have to pay people to do hard work, right? And you have to make sure you're paying the person that you're going to hire into these roles on a level that's equal to what other high-level professionals in your organization are making. So that can be, those are, you know, on the long list of hard conversations to have, those can be hard conversations to have. So that's a starting point though, right? You have to make sure that you're properly compensating the people in these roles. And then, as you mentioned, Jill, earlier, figuring out the right way to have an operating budget. Arlington, of course, is a larger community. And I think in the most recent fiscal year, we were able to put aside $30,000 in an operating budget for various trainings and consultancy that Jill and her team could access. I know not every community could do that, but I think if you build out a scope of work that you're looking to achieve and you realize that, you know, you have to understand or acknowledge what you can or can't do internally, 5, 10, 15, putting aside some pot of municipal money that your DEI officer can put towards outside resources, I think is an important step.
And then a follow-up question to that was around where you can find resources and funding to start the process of doing DEI work. I think there's also some grants available. I know we were lucky enough to make use of ARPA funds, so there's money out there. You just have to, unfortunately, do the hard work of looking for it. There's no easy directory to find it. I don't know if Albert or Faustina, if you have anything to add for that.
Yeah, I would say, you know, if it's fitting for you to join the DEI coalition, and your role sort of encompasses some of the things that Jill talked about earlier, I would say that this group is a resource. Anytime I have a question, I put it out to the group, and like within minutes, 3 or 4 people respond. Here's the resource. Here's a guide. Here's what we did. Here's, you know, so I definitely think relying on the network that has already done it. You know, like Jill's been in her role for 3 years, so she has a plethora of resources. There's other people that have been doing this work in a different way, and they have access to like grants and information. So tapping into a network of people who are already doing the work is always like a good place to start.
Yeah, and I would just add again, yes, I mean, the coalition is an incredible resource. And I would think, you know, organizations, particularly municipalities, think about diversifying your work, diversifying your funding sources in terms of think about, you know, even, you know, private funds. I mean, you need to think about this thing from a standpoint of long term. You know, it's not just about putting out a fire now, really about trying to really address culture. And I think that is about involving, you know, private and public stakeholders in this space. And again, that's something the coalition's leaning into in terms of supporting our broader work. But I think municipalities should be thinking the same way about really diversifying the type of funds they get in for this work. And again, not looking at it as really just short term, but long term work.
Next question we had was, what was the first step to starting an equity audit? And is it important to involve external evaluators? Yes, do not do the audit yourself. You can't. It's not, no, just no. Flat no. Not realistic, not possible. It's possible, but you might not survive it. So again, that ties into funding, being able to support hiring consultants to do so, and making sure you also pick the right one, working through to see if it's a right fit. You have to make sure it's a cultural fit as well. But I don't know, does anyone want to, we're in the process in Arlington right now of doing an equity audit. So again, the first couple of years we're settling in, dealing with a lot that was going on, and now taking kind of a pause to really reassess and look at what we need to do and work forward to do. So we started our equity audit in June, but put out an RFP in February. So gave some time, a few months to go through that whole process to do it right, and being realistic with the time as well. In the scope of work that I proposed, I said this will be 10 to 12 months because it's not going to be something that's rushed. You need to be able to take the time to do all of the work. Originally, our consultants came back with an updated timeline of 8 months, and just like that, we're right back on track for 10 to 12 because they realized the pace of local government. Let me see. So there's a question that just popped up about recommending consultants that do this work specifically. That's a huge question. Currently, there are a lot of consultants coming into this work The Boston Foundation released their racial equity capacity builders directory, some long title, but it's basically a directory of hundreds of consultants who do this work that you can look through. But again, you need to define what it is you're looking for. If you want to focus on just the internal culture, that's one thing. If you want to look at your community and what barriers to access there are, that's one thing. You need to be able to refine as your municipality what it is you want as an outcome before looking at consultants, because it can't just be this broad, you can't look at everything. That's not realistic. So being able to narrow that down and then working through that directory has been helpful. But then also when you conduct, or if you do an RFP, and you receive proposals, you'll get to see the work that folks are doing, which helps you inform rather than just picking someone and going with it.
Can I just jump in real quick? I just think also it's important when you do your audits, and again, this is why I echo what Jill said around making sure you try to get the right, the right one to do your audit, the right organization to do your audit. I think just taking the time for that process. Because this is your foundation, right? This is the evaluation. This is the assessment in terms of what you need to get that. Because but the key thing I think is trying to ensure you're getting true representation from the community. Oftentimes these audits are rushed, and then you have data, right? But it's not true data in terms of like who is in your community, those voices that, because we understand also research and evaluation is just what this is. It's still very challenging for certain communities to participate in that. So making sure that you have that true representation from your community, so that could, because that's going to inform the work. And if it's not a true representation, I think the work would just be built on just not, it's not the information that's really going to help really address the long-term, but also in some of the kind of historical challenges that probably those communities have faced. So really just thinking through that process a little bit as you're going through it.
Yeah. Another question that came through was around reporting systems for bias, racism, and discrimination. Are municipalities looking at and increasing these systems, also acknowledging the harm these systems can cause? Do you want to speak to that?
I can speak to that. I just want to say, again, this is going back to like partnering with your HR department, like because Drew and I have such a great partnership, something comes to him, he comes to me. Something comes to me, I go to him. And we partner very well in saying like, okay, what is this? How deep do we need to get into this? Does the person want to take action? What does the person want? And really honoring the person that came to us with the concern and really like letting them guide us to how we can support them. And it's really, again, critical, right? Because if these two, because sometimes people are going to come to you as the DEI person, and sometimes they're going to go to the HR. But if you two are not talking and your sort of approach isn't unified, it's people are going to receive different messages, and it's not going to feel consistent. It's not going to feel like the municipality is handling things appropriately. So it's important. And then sometimes Drew and I stare at each other and we're like, we need to hire an outside investigator. And that's okay too. Sometimes you're like, I'm too close to this, or I've told Drew straight up, I'm like, I'm going to be biased here and I can't do it. So it's like, you have to have those conversations and you have to be aligned on what's going to be the approach and what's going to be the steps in order to make sure that this is handled correctly. So it is, I think, going back to the partnership between HR and the DEI person, or if you don't have a DEI person, making sure that the HR person is always having another thought partner in the room when thinking about this, because sometimes, again, we all miss things. We all have those sort of learning edges, and we might miss something. So if you don't bring another voice to the table, you're not getting another perspective. So that whether it is an assistant HR person or someone else in your office, trying to have another perspective at the table is really critical. And if you're not doing DEI trainings, you really should hire, if you don't have a DEI person yet, hire an outside consultant. That's what Drew did. Drew brought me on, again, before I was in this role, before this role was even an idea, Drew brought me on board to do these trainings. So it is important that you also do these trainings, but then because you have a place to hold people accountable. right? If we just did, like Drew said, we've trained over 200 employees this summer around bias, around microaggressions. So if someone comes to us and said, this person said this, or this person microaggressed me or whatever, we can have a starting point. We're like, all right, let's talk to the supervisor, manager, whoever. And our starting point is like, we went through this summer. What did not stick? Like what didn't, you grasp about like saying XYZ and how that's harmful or, offensive. So it gives you all a starting point of accountability that maybe you didn't have before, right? And again, that common language, and that we're all getting trained on the same thing, and we're having that sort of leveled foundation to sort of start, be that starting point is really critical. So I just want to say that it is important that there's collaboration, that there's thought partners, and it's not just one person being the keeper of decision making. And then also, if you don't have the DEI person yet, hire outside consultants to do some training, because then you have a mechanism of accountability, especially for your repeated offenders, because we all have them in our municipalities. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, and I just want to add, so that's the internal piece. Externally, we have our Human Rights Commission in Arlington that handles incidents of bias and discrimination. It's kind of a three-way system between them, myself, and our police department. And I think someone had added a question about relationship with police. Working with the police is vital. They're a town department. Your job is to work with every town entity that includes them. And that's a part of also community healing. You can't exclude a division because of how some members feel. Everyone needs to work together. So our reporting system is based there. You can file a complaint online, writing it and sending it in, calling me, calling the police. Either way, all three of us are involved to determine what the next best steps are. So that's for that external facing piece for our community members that's available.
And I just add to that, just spoke like 1 minute. I would say just echo, yes, definitely. I think for particular communities, I think we need to make sure that it shows that you have this relationship with the police. I think we have to show that. I think that has to be very public, that relationship. And we are really fortunate here in Andover to have the police department really intricately a part of some working groups that really focused on this kind of work. So that commitment is there, but I would encourage really that to be transparent. That's the two things I add. One is transparency, make sure that relationship is transparent so we can show those particular communities that we are thinking about that trauma historically that's happened with them. So that's important for that, and I would also just make sure that, this is going to take time, right? Because those communities particularly, it's a trust factor there. And so just because, and I would encourage this to the folks who are kind of building this, is don't think that things going to happen overnight in terms of just because you have this relationship with the police or you've demonstrated you have this pipeline for reporting, people aren't going to automatically report. I mean, it's going to take time, so don't give up. Just understand you're building a pipeline that had some really, it had some challenges within itself in terms of developing, in terms of people trusting that pipeline. So just give it some time.
Yeah. Okay, I'm looking at the time, so I know we have 10 minutes left. I think we can get to a couple more questions, and then we'll have our last guest speaker before we wrap things up. Some of these other questions, I think, were directed to you, Faustina, but I think all of us can kind of answer them. How to navigate different power dynamics. There was a question specifically about the issues that Alert handles, and how do affinity groups or RGs function in municipalities? So, yeah.
I will say, our process for an unarmed crisis response is going on now 1.5 years. It's very complicated, and I'm happy to talk offline about that because I can rant about that for an hour. And our employee resource groups, you just need to buy in from leadership. If leadership says we're doing this, you launch them, they send out an email, you figure out who your facilitators are going to be. It's volunteers, so you need to make sure that you have volunteers that want to facilitate these dialogues and that they have the skills to do so too. We had a few facilitators that we needed to coach them, and it's okay. They need some coaching. They want to do it. They're excited. But you need to coach people. You need to have those guidelines in place and community norms and all that good stuff. Again, I have a guide that I created. Happy to share that. Just please email me. I know we're short on time and I can rant about these things forever.
Yeah, I would add to the question about affinity groups. I've been asked, why we don't have them. And then again, when you look at your workforce and your demographics, do you even have enough people to make actual affinity groups? No. So that's not appropriate right now. In due time, maybe, but you really, again, everything doesn't fit as though this works for us, so it's going to work for you. You need to work with your own workforce, your own community to figure out what's going to be the best role and resources for them. And then I think the question about power dynamics is really interesting. I think I said it earlier, someone in this role should be a part of leadership and be backed up by leadership. So I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that. I feel like I did a lot of talking.
I think you're doing talking because you should. It makes sense. I think you have a lot to share around this. I would just also say, I echo that. It sends a signal, right? I mean, I think it's important that we send signals to the community that this work matters. I think we send signals to the town employees that this work matters. And I think that's, where this work sits and how it reports it, all that stuff is very important. I think that access is critical, but yeah.
I would just jump in, Jill, to say on the municipal leader side, yeah, you have to empower people in these roles. You have to listen to them. You have to take their advice, even if that advice can be very uncomfortable in a public setting and a recommendation that you're making to an elected body. It's hard to do, but if you really want it to be successful, if you want it to be a true working relationship, you have to be willing to take this person's advice, even when it's hard.
Thanks. Okay, think we're gonna stop questions there. We are capturing everything, so I'm wondering maybe afterwards, Coalition, we can come up with some type of frequently asked questions thing and put it on the webpage. But thank you everyone for asking your questions and providing your comments. We really appreciate it. And now I just want to invite Cynthia Lewis to speak. Cynthia is the Committee and Research Director for the Joint Committee on Racial Equity, Civil Rights, and Inclusion.
Good morning, everyone. This was very informative. I want to thank the DEI Coalition for inviting me. I'm very much connected to Emily. I used to actually work for her husband as the district director for the 12th Suffolk District. Now in the role of the Committee Director for Racial Equity, Civil Rights, and Inclusion, long word title. Just to give people an idea, first and foremost, understand that on the state level, well, let me get to the info. So I am the Committee Director for Racial Equity, Civil Rights, and Inclusion under the leadership of State Representative Bud Williams, who is the 11th Hampton District representative that's out in Springfield. With Springfield being an hour and a half away from Boston, as you see in my background, that is my home behind me at the State House. So I run the office at the State House. We have a staff of 5 additional people, and the committee is a joint committee. And so we have 11 House members that make up the House side of the committee and 6 Senate members that make up the Senate side. Rep. Bud Williams is the House chair, hence I'm the committee director. And then the Senate chair is Senator Sonia Chain-Diaz. But to give you an idea of what the committee is actually about and what we're mandated to do. The committee's mandate is to do 3 things. First, to advise the legislature, review existing laws and policy proposals, and then make policy recommendations and conduct impact assessments so that the legislation can draft policy to begin to disseminate systemic racism and promote equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. To that extent, the committee's goal is to synthesize the feedback we receive and ultimately produce recommendations for legislation. We attend meetings like this. We speak to community constituents and leaders, both in the city and local governments, to hear what is the issue, what is the concern, what is it that you need for us to do as representatives of your community. And so we act as an advisory and an oversight role to the legislature, as well as to the chairs and members of standing committees. So you know, if you're familiar with the State House, they have 100 different committees. The Racial Equity Committee, being that everything is at the present moment, you know, equity and inclusion and diversity is across the board now, because again, what we saw with George Floyd. The committee is a new committee, it's a newly established committee that the president decided that all states have to have this committee. And so we are in the process of building that. And what does that look like? My experience from being a district director, I was the active. And I was very quickly told that once I got onto the State House, I no longer could be that fighter for power for the people, but I had to be more of a listener. My heart is always in organizing. My heart is always in trying to help the next person. And so being present today and listening to the presenters and understanding that we have over 100 people that are on this call shows me that, you know, this is an important work that we do. Me being not technically on the ground anymore, I rely on your input. I rely on folks getting in contact with me. And my email is here on the slide next to them. And so the first thing that I would tell you is anywhere in your community, if you are trying to get funding, and I'm gonna ask to share a slide, share my desktop in a moment. So because I heard people asking for funding, I heard people wanting to know how do you get certain things. And so the first thing that I would tell you is that there is money, and the State House is responsible for writing bills and policies and allocating funds. That's what we do. We do not change the lights in the street. We do not fix the roads, but we do listen to the community, and we try to figure out what's the best way that we can assist and support through policy writing and allocation of funds. And so I know I have limited time, and I don't want to hold everyone up, but just to give you some idea of so over the past fiscal year, FY22, I'm sure everybody has been familiar with the ARPA spending package. And that was, again, legislation that was passed. And that's how, you know, it works for us. We see a need, a state representative or senator presents it to the House, they present a bill, and then it goes before the House for a vote. And so the House accepted for the COVID relief. The report was signed by all conferences, and they have a fiscal note of $3,998,724. And so this ARPA money was dispersed throughout the states, and then the states themselves had the opportunity to go ahead and disperse it amongst different local governments. And so just some of the things that the Racial Committee is working on right now, we're doing a construction study for the Holyoke Soldiers Home, trying to make sure that there's diversity that's going on there. So we're working with contractors and making sure that local folks are getting assistance. We've also passed the Family Mobility Act, which allows persons who are unable to prove lawful presence in the United States to apply for a Massachusetts driver's license. So we know who's on the roads. And then it was carefully crafted for public safety legislation, so that anybody who's using our roads can be identified and also insured. And the one that's been most prevalent amidst persons of color is the Crown Act, which we passed. And so now you cannot be discriminated based on your hair. As you see, my hair is braided today. And so just going into the State House, I've never had folks look at me crazy, but other people have, and it's not okay, because you want to express your culture. And so those are kinds of things that we've been working on. The comprehensive reproduction rights. from protection of reproduction. It's a woman's choice. If you notice, when it comes to things across the country, Massachusetts is leading in being as most diverse and most inclusive as a safe haven for people who are fighting against discrimination. The $4.2 billion economic development bill is also something which provides one-time rebates of $250 for taxpayers who file return and $500 for married taxpayers who file joint returns. It's just these are the legislation that is trying to help make sure that money is going into communities of color and that people are knowledgeable that these funds are available to them. The comprehensive behavioral legislation is another an act that addresses barriers to care for mental health. And so, the bills that we passed, although they are a broad brush, our role as the racial committee, racial equity and inclusion committee, is to make sure that that money is making sure that it's going into our and being there available to support. Sickle cell anemia, special commission and mass health reporting mandate is also in the process. And so I could go on. I've got a whole list of different legislation that we've done just in this FY22, but I don't want to bore you with all of that. More so speaking to, there's a 4.2 economic development bill that was important. And so what's coming up in the works for FY22, 23, we're establishing legislation to establish cultural diversity in the curriculum in elementary and secondary schools in Commonwealth. We're also working on H5106, which is an act to relieve the strain on limited licensed medical professionals and correctional facilities. H31170 is the establishment of the Clock Walker Day, which is also known as Emancipation Day. People are real familiar with Juneteenth, but not many people know about Clock Walker. And so these are historical people who have paved way for us in this country. And so we want to make sure that they are recognized. The establishment of an Office of Youth Development Service Delivery, so that we're actually targeting our young people and making sure that they're getting the services that they need as well. And then I have, lastly, an act to expand opportunities for minority and business women enterprises in the public construction study that we're doing. And so with all that being said, I also wanted to share my screen, if that's possible. Can I do that?
Yes, we can give you privileges. I'm just wondering in terms of a time check right now.
No, I'm just going to show websites where people can go to get information.
All right, perfect. Let's see. You should be a co-host.
Oh, the share screen button? Hit that.
Yeah, yep.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
Can everybody see where I'm at?
We cannot. So you may just have to select the screen. When you go to share your screen, it'll ask you which screen you want to share. So you would just have to select the one that you want to.
Well, while Cynthia gets her screen going, Jill, do you want to just do a couple of next steps and the thank yous, and then Cynthia, you can have a moment to get your screen going.
Okay.
There we go.
You can
It's
see me?
Go for it.
I'm sorry, I'm not that tech savvy.
You're good.
The first and foremost, I want people to understand that if you go to the Find My Legislature, and you just can Google it, this will identify who your legislator is in your community. Those are the people who have the money. Your state reps, your state senators. They're the ones that allocate that funds. They're the ones that can write the bills. And so if you're not familiar with who your legislator is for your community, find out who that is. When you go to the legislator here, you just find the person who's in charge of whatever it is that you're looking for, and it'll come up for you. And so that's screen one. And then for the grants, for the federal grants, this is the Senator Ed Markey's page. And so it talks about grants and federal investment. So you can find out who's eligible for a grant, where to go for a grant for the federal side. And then on the this is about any bills or what have you that you're interested in, to find out more information. And so for just, I'm just going to type in. So once I type that in, it'll take me to the actual bill. And so you can always find out where things are in the process. And so those are the few things that I just wanted to share. But I more so, how do I stop this? Okay, stop share. Okay. Now, is my camera not on? Okay. And so with that being said, I am available as committee director. I definitely am going to get a copy of this presentation. I do want to talk to some people offline about best practices. And then, just letting people know that I am available 24/7. My cell number is actually on my business card. The email is always a good way to have a track record. But as Amy will tell you, it's better to say, hey, Cynthia, I just sent you I can email. Because again, like most of us, we have 4,000 plus emails that come in on a regular. And what people do not understand is, although we have great workers on the ground in the local area, I cover the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So it's not just Boston, it's not just Springfield or my Boston. We have to make sure that the legislation that passes in the House has a diverse background. That, if we do see legislation, and it's not all inclusive. A prime example was with the COVID money. ARPA money was given so that folks could get vaccinated. Well, guess what? They weren't getting vaccinated in Roxbury. They weren't getting vaccinated, down in South End or what have you. And so funding was deliberately allocated to those communities so that folks could go to community centers, go to health centers, places, so that they could actually vaccinate. And so that's the thing that we need to hear for you guys on the ground for the students to get one. What are you hearing? What's the issue? How can we assist? And then, from my perspective as committee director for racial equity, I have the umbrella. So all of the legislators have to maintain underneath racial equity. However, it starts with you on the ground and then your particular legislator. And so all of the state reps and the senators kind of work cohesively hand in hand. If somebody tells me, hey, in Lynn, such and such so and so is happening, and I've already talked to my state rep, and I haven't heard anything. That's a phone call from my office. What's the hold on? My boss will be quick to say, find the money. And so that's something that I have to do. And I'm glad to do it because that's my ground, my feet on the ground, to the best of my ability. And so with that being said, again, I want to thank you all for having me. I am always accessible and available, and I look forward to continuing working with you guys.
Thanks, Cynthia. We'll definitely be including your information in the follow-up that we'll send out. And I just know in terms of next steps for the coalition, we'll be sharing information around resources and funding, around different language access support, the need for more support coming from the state, specifically in terms of training and research and stats on who's doing this work. And then we're also looking to expand the guide and continue to capture the learnings of folks who are doing this work and share that out as well.
Can I just say one more thing? I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, because it just went out of my head. So State Representative Bud Williams was planning to be here and was planning to do this little spiel that I just did. Unfortunately, today is the funeral of his brother. And so I am stepping in his place, but he brings his readings and he wants the community to know that he is also willing to know. Like I said, things come through me and I bring it to the lab. But in his absence, I represent him. And I also wanted to recognize my staff who's on duty here, on the call here. Her name is Sebla Alamu. She is our researcher, and all those little bills that I just spewed off, she put those things together for me for this presentation. So I want to make sure I recognize her and thank her for that. And now I'm done.
Great, thank you. So again, we'll send out additional information. It'll be on the webpage as well. That's hosted on MAPC's site. And then I also just want to do a special shout out and thank you. I believe Emily put it in the chat, but to the subcommittee who helped put this launch event together. That would be myself, Emily, Teresa Marzilli, who's with the Town of Arlington, Naji Nunley, who's with MAPC, Dr. Maritza Barros, Chris Mary Gonzalez from Springfield, Tina Lose with Newburyport, and Antonia Soares Thompson with the Middlesex District Attorney's Office. So if there are questions, comments, anything, please contact us at the massdeicoalition@gmail.com. Again, this is recorded, so we'll send that out as well. And I appreciate everyone taking the time out of their Wednesday morning to hang out with us. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
As everyone's leaving, Jillian and Em, at some point, can we do a conference call? Not today.
Yes, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to see how we can do better at coordinating and collaborating.